Hello, how's it going? By and large, the most important thing as an independent game developer is tools. Tools for making things. Tools for level design. Tools, they're really good. So what I'm going to be doing in this video is I'm going to be producing a little mini level editor. This level editor should be good for any game which can be built based on a top-down 2D representation. So anything from a platformer, a cozy game, whatever that means, a Doom or Wolfenstein style game should be possible to build it on the basis of this editor. I'm going to be using Python to design this, and I still use Python to develop my tools for the reason that with a tool, reliability and time to develop is probably the top priority. And in this case, Python, hands down for me, is my favorite. Furthermore, I'm going to be using Qt6 or PyQt6. So if you look up online how to install Qt6, there's a lot of information. I'm not going to go through it for the reason that the info is very specific, and there are very specific, there are good and bad ways to install Qt6. If you do the wrong thing, it could be a 40 gigabyte download. That's not a joke. You'll need that on your system. And in addition to that, you'll need PyQt6. Independently, these are different things, but PyQt6 is the Python binding to Qt6. That's what we'll need. Okay, so what will we have? Well, here's sort of a view of the level editor that we're going to make. We're going to have a main content pane where we'll have some objects like blocks, let's say, and each of these blocks are going to represent different things, and we'll be able to sort of click. Is that a mouse? Close enough. We'll be able to click, create things, delete things, drag things around, do all that stuff. We'll also have some navigation buttons so we can click to move around. We'll also be able to zoom in and out, all that stuff. I'll get to that in a second. Some things, we're going to have some things. So to start with, I'd plan this out and I would say, well, what's the simplest editor that I can make? The simplest, let's say, representation of the objects in my world. Well, the simplest thing is to have basically an object code, which represents what the thing is. And I'll also sort of give each object a position and a size. But regardless of which object I'm dropping in the world, every single object should have these properties. This editor will be using something called the MVC design pattern. MVC design pattern stands for model. A model is the underlying data that we're manipulating. We have a view of that data. So everything that we put here is a view. This window pane, this frame here, is a view. We'll put things inside that frame, and those will be widgets of some sort. Well, they'll be views. Obviously, this is a view. We'll have some views in here into various bits of the program, and then we'll have a controller, and the controller holds everything together. So it'll really help to sort of separate these things out from each other. But yeah, let's have a little look at the window that I'll make. So I find when I'm designing a GUI program that it really helps to think about the composition of elements. So each little composition will have a fundamental direction, horizontal or vertical. If I look here, from top to bottom, this is going vertical. I've got this frame here and this frame here. And then I'm going to look at that top frame and I'll say, okay, well, let's say I want to add a bunch of widgets for various things. In my example, it's just going to be zoom in and out. When I add those things, I want those things to run across. So my top frame is going to have a vertical layout. This frame here, as we put things in here, they're going to be, sorry, did I say vertical? I meant horizontal. These things are going to be horizontal as well, but then within those individual frames, they will have a vertical layout. Let's say we put one little editor widget, put another little editor widget, and so on. And same thing here, we can put a bunch of editor widgets. Whereas this center view, it's not really going to have a layout. It's going to be a freeform single canvas object that we draw onto. And yeah, there we have it. Okay, so with all of that really rigorous planning out of the way, let's jump in and start making this thing. Alrighty, so here we are in our code. What I'll do is I'll just change into my development folder, make a directory called map editor, and that'll be it. Then I'll just open up Visual Studio Code. I'll open that folder. Okay, awesome. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to write out a to-do list, because I find that this helps. When I'm developing apps, I don't make this to-do list 100% up front. I'll usually sort of think about a problem that I'm working on, break it down into stages, have a bunch of to-do items, but I do find that it really helps to do that. So here's what I'm going to do. Some stages. First of all, I'm going to basically make the app, make a thing that I can run and close. Then I'm going to give it a reset state function so that we know all of the variables of the app and we can like start it up and then we're good to go. I'm just sort of going through the lifetime of a usage. Then I'm going to build the basic layout of the widgets, the frames and things. Sorry, just the frames. The frames and the way they sort of flex around and everything. Then I'm going to build the widgets, which will go into those frames. Then I'm going to connect the widgets to the events. So when I click on this thing, what does it do? All the connectivity. Then I'm going to create a menu and some other stuff. We'll see. We will see. So one thing that I like to do is I like to make a sort of a shared import file. So I'm going to make one. I'm going to call it config, and this is where I'm going to have all the stuff which is important. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to import PyQt6. See, I have it here, but if we don't have PyQt6, we can get it. If we just go make a new terminal window, and then we'll write pip install PyQt6. It'll go through, and in my case, it'll say, yeah, I've already got it. But you may need to install that, and you'll definitely need to install Qt6 before doing this. But anyway, then I'm just going to put in a few extra. I'm actually going to live on the wild side and just star import this. So that's probably all I need in my major import at the moment, my shared import. So I'll just go and make my controller, and I'll actually call it controller. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to import my config. With PyQt6, it does need a main entry point. The way we can create a main entry point is with this test. We can test if this name is equal to main, and this is constraining the execution to begin specifically from this point. And that's sys, and I'm going to need that to get the command line arguments. But yep, okay, cool. So we've created the app, and then go app exec. Let's see what happens now. So I'll just hit run on this. And as I can see, nothing is happening. Okay, cool. So what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to add a window to my app. Otherwise, it'll start and stop. So I'll go in here and I'm going to make a class. I'm going to call it editor. And this is going to inherit from QMainWindow. So in my initializer, the first thing I'll do is I'll call the superclass initializer. That's 2 underscores there. And then I'm just going to do this. Cool. Okay. So here I have created my window, and we can see we have the title up here, Map Maker. Your appearance may be a little different, just depending on how your system is set up. But anyway, I'm happy with that, so we can close that down. I mean, how quick was that? We've got our first item done. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start making my model, my underlying data. And like I said, this is going to be really, really simple, but hopefully extendable. So I'll make a file, I'll call it model.py. And first of all, I'm going to need everything. And then I'm going to define my model class. Now my model class is really going to be a simple container. So when we come to create the model, the info we're going to need is we're going to need a rectangle. This will represent the position and size of the model. And this will be, if I go Q, we can have integer or floating point. I'm going to go with the floating point rectangle. There's really no reason to do it one way or the other. And then I'm going to define, we're going to take in a type, which will be an integer. We have a position and a size, and we have some sort of code that just indicates what object this represents. Is it a player? Is it an enemy? Is it a wall or something? While I'm at it, yeah, why not? I'm just going to go into my config, and I'm going to define a number of constants. First of all, our mouse can have a mode which corresponds to what do we want to happen when we click. I'm going to put 3 modes, select, edit, or new. I'll go ahead and define integer codes to represent each of those modes. Then I'll define the size of the window. Now what I'll do is I'll define a code, an integer code, to represent each type of object that I can have in the world. Something like this. I'm sure you can see how you can add a whole bunch of different object types here. Should be easy enough to extend. But then for each object, I'm going to need to define the size of that object. So this will be a dictionary with key type integer, because the key is going to be the integer object code, and corresponding value type will be a tuple of. I guess given that we can have fractional sizes, we'll go float. But then we're going to have object colors. So for object colors, the key type will be integer. The value type will be what's called a Q color. There we go, that's looking good. And then I'm going to need 2 more. And these are going to be used for loading and saving. When I save the object, when I save the level, I'm going to need to look at the object type, the code, and then get a string to write out. And then when I load, I'm going to go in the reverse. So I'm going to need quick lookups for the object codes and the object names. I'm also going to define some codes to represent the movement actions that the camera can take. Okay, and that's all the constants that I'm going to use. So now I'll go back to my controller and I will give this another method. And that method is going to be to reset the state of the controller ready to begin designing a new level. So I'm defining a few things here. I'm going to have a zoom factor, which lets me sort of zoom the camera in and out. We'll be discussing that in a little bit. I'm also going to have a brush, and the brush is just a simple variable which keeps track of which object is my mouse going to drop if I click right now. So we'll go current brush, and that will be the player by default. So we start off dropping down players. Okay. Then I'm also going to need a collection of objects. So this will be a list of, if I go model, I need to import that, sorry. Okay, so we clear off the objects in the game, and I'm going to need two more things. I'm going to need to keep track of the selected object, current selected object. So I'll say, all right, I'll make a selected object, and that will be either a game object, or it's optional, it could be none, and currently it's none. We haven't selected anything. And then I'm also going to need the mouse mode, and that will be mouse mode new. Okay, so upon creation, I will reset my state. Cool. So it doesn't look like we've done much at the moment, but we are starting to set that groundwork. If I run this right now, the program should have some variables which will be useful for me as I keep building stuff with my program. All right, so next step is let's build the layout for our app. Before I jump in and do that, I'm just going to head over. I'm going to make this actually. I'm going to go ahead and make a new file, and this will be for my view. So in here, I'll go ahead and import everything. That's probably all I need for now. I'm just going to make a class which inherits from widget, and I'll give it an empty initializer. And let's get into it. So if you remember the drawing that I drew at the beginning of the video, basically everything at the top level is going to be flowing from the top to the bottom. We'll have our top frame, and then we'll have a middle frame. So we'll create a layout, and there are two types of layouts. There's vertical box and horizontal box. I'm going to make a vertical box. I'll set that as my layout. Okay, great. Then I'm going to need my top frame and my middle frame. So my top frame, like I said, the widgets in there are going to be going across. So I'll create a horizontal box layout. The same for both of these. And I will go ahead and add these both to the layout. So I'll take my layout, just like that. And because this is a vertical box, these are going to be, the order that I add them matters. It's going to go top to bottom. Now what I want to do is I can probably leave the top frame. That's fine. But I am going to put some more layout within the middle frame, because the middle frame goes left to right, but there are things in there, and some of those things are going top to bottom. I know it's sort of a recursive definition, but if I go left to right within the middle frame, I'm going to have, I'll call it my tools frame, and then my main panel, my main view, and then my detail frame. When I click on an object, I can see details about it. So I'll go ahead, I'll make a tools frame, and that will be going top to bottom. And then for the main view, I'm going to need that view widget, the view module. Cool. So having made all these things, I'm then going to add them to my middle frame. So I'll get the middle frame. Yeah, again for the detail frame. And see if anything happens. I'm curious. Nah, that's fine. Oh, but so what I'll do to get around this is, like I was doing before, I'll make a widget, which is sort of a dummy widget. So I'll go make that dummy widget, apply the whole everything to that widget, and then I'll set that as my central widget. And this will pretty much add it to the program. Okay, yeah, so like I said, nothing visible, but it should be there. Okay, so now building widgets. So let me just go to my controller and I'll add a method to build the widgets. Just while I'm there, you can see what I'm doing here. I'm just making sure that I am actually calling these things. Okay, cool. So when it comes to this, I'm actually going to decompose this into a few subtasks because we have essentially got 3 frames. We've got the top frame, then we've got the tool frame, and then the detail frame on the right. So I'll make a method. Just like that. Okay, those are the 3 stages. I'll go ahead and make these methods, give them stubs, and then start filling them in. Okay, so on the top, the only widget I can think of at the moment is basically the buttons to zoom in and zoom out. Those buttons are both going to be packed together. So I'm going to make a frame, essentially. There's a few steps here. One step is I'm going to need to make a general button widget. So I'll just go back to my view module, and in there, I'll define a new class. Okay, cool. So I'll go and initialize the superclass, passing in the label, and I will go ahead and also set the checkability property. Now I'm going to need a few things. First of all, I'm going to need a frame. Then I'm going to need the little I'm going to need to flex things horizontally within this. It's a bit strange because things are already going left to right horizontally, but if I were to add more objects, I'd want to keep these objects grouped together. Okay, cool. So a bit of typing there, but essentially what I've done is I've created a label, 2 buttons, one to zoom in, one to zoom out. They're not going to do anything at the moment. That'll be the next stage. But I can run this and verify that we've got them. Okay, cool. So a bit of a funny thing is that they are sort of bundled together in the middle of the screen, but as I add more things down below, they'll sort of get pushed up to the top. One thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add some styling in order to just make it clearer, like add border to this thing, and that's a quick fix. There we go. I think that's fine. Let's give that a go, see what that looks like. Oh, no, that's fine. That's fine. It's a little ugly at the moment because this thing is literally taking up all the space that it can. So I'm going to close that down. I'm done with the top widgets. So for the tool widgets, I'm only going to have one widget. It will just be a drop-down box where I select what I want the mouse to do. The options will either be select mode, edit mode, or new mode. And we can see we've got our combo box down here. We can click it and we have things. We can select things. Again, this isn't doing anything currently. We haven't hooked everything up. But one thing that I'm not quite happy with is that it's come out like right as far bottom as it possibly can. So I'm going to set an option to set it as far to the top as we possibly can. So this is in here. And then see we have a few options here, including alignment. Okay, give that a go. Just going to make a quick adjustment. There we go, set fixed size. My size is going to be, I'll make a Q size object, and I'll put in the main window width and height. And while I'm at it, I'll go ahead and save those options. There we go. It's a little better. See if this makes a difference. There we go. Okay, that's much better. So now I'll have a look at the detail widgets. So the detail widgets, I'm going to go ahead and create another view, another thing. So I'll just go over to my view module and I'll create another class. And this class is going to represent the details of a brush. Okay, cool. So again, a lot of typing, but here we go. We've got it. This is holding a label and a combo box. in that combo box, we have the different types of objects that we can select. And that's our brush view. That's all we need. So I can minimize this, and we'll work with this a little bit more later. But for now, this is enough to display it at least. I'm also going to need to pass in the parent because the brush view queries the parent's current brush value for its starting. So here we can select which object we want to drop down. Okay, I'm not quite happy with this placement. Yeah, I think it's insert stretch. I looked this up online, how to force things to be at the top. And see what this does. Oh yeah, look at that. Everything has come up the top. Very nice. All right, so we've built the widgets. Let's connect some actions to them. I guess we'll go top to bottom. So we've got literally the top widgets. So in the top widget, I've got this button here, and this button is controlling my zoom. So I'll add some functions to set the zoom. I'll make this modify zoom function, which takes a factor, and all it does is we take the zoom factor and multiply it by the given factor. And then what this is going to do is this is going to change the view. So I'm also going to, well, I should probably start drawing a view, right? So before I do this, I'll go in and I'll start working some more on my main view. Okay, so for my initializer, I've set a bunch of these things. I'm also going to set another variable, which is the color with which the background is going to be refreshed. So I'll have this color variable, and I'll just go ahead and set this right now. And I'm going to override the paint event of the parent. The way I do this is I take in an event, which is an instance of a queue. And all I'm going to do right now is I'll grab the drawing area, which will pretty much be the whole thing, because the queue paint event is going to cover the whole canvas. And I'll construct a queue painter object. This queue painter object is going to take in a reference to the object that it should be painting to, and then I will say, hey, painter, fill the rectangle with our refresh color, and then why not, I'll also set the pen, and this is the line color that I'll be using. Just like that. Cool. So let's give this a shot. Let's see if this is drawing things properly. So just go over to the controller, hit play, and nice. We've got our blue area. This is where we're going to do our editing. Cool. Okay. So I'm also going to give myself a function which basically redraws everything, passes the message along to redraw. Something like that. Okay, this will be more useful later on, but I just want to have this now because definitely when I zoom in or out, I want my view to change. Okay, so I've defined my function, which is going to be called when I press on one of the buttons. What I need to do now is hook that up to my zoom buttons, basically. So I'll go to my top widgets, and I've got this button here. So I'll take the button, get its pressed event. Sorry, pressed. I'll go released. And connect that. And what I need to do is I need to connect it to the function. Now I'm going to use a lambda here because that means I can pre-bake my argument. So I'm going to call the modify zoom function I'm zooming in, so I'm going to increase the zoom level, multiply by 1.25, and then likewise, if I'm zooming out, I'm going to be decreasing my zoom level, something like that. Pretty happy with that. So again, the purpose of this lambda is to take this function, have pre-baked arguments, and then just take the signal and convert it into a function call. And I've got the tool widgets. Now in the tool widgets, I've just got these selection modes, and very similarly, here we go. So current, when I select a new item, the current index changed function gets called. This function does give us an argument, which is the new index, which I'm going to take in an integer, and I'll just say set my mouse mode to the new mode. Okay, cool. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a look at the brush view. So I've got this brush view. This is a bunch of different objects that I can select, but I just made this as a combo box. I didn't actually give it any interactivity, so I'm going to make a function to handle that. Just like that. Now I just want to note here that this is not the 100% most software engineering correct way to do it. The quote-unquote correct way to do it is to actually have this function defined inside the controller, and then at the creation point to pass that callback over to the widget. But this is such a constrained situation that I'm just going to do it this way anyway, because I don't see a really strong benefit to doing it the quote-unquote correct way. And there's do things a bunch of different ways, why not? Anyway, so I'll get my selector, take the current index changed signal, and connect that to, again, I'll go change my mind. Because I just noticed, right? That's sort of doing the same thing as what this function is already doing. And as a matter of fact, we can do the same thing over here on the controller. So we can just go set mouse mode, that will be called, and it will be called with that input I. Okay, but if I were to run this right now, obviously this is, ooh, that's not great. Okay, so that situation notwithstanding, this is sort of working, but it's not really doing anything, right? What's happening? We're player, new mode, nothing's happening. So I am going to do a little bit of work. So there's a few things. One thing, I need a click event. But in order to have a click event, I need to know about like where in the world I clicked. So I'm going to be doing a little bit of coding, a little bit of grunt work, because I need a conversion function. This might be one of the things that's easier for me to do rather than say. So what I'll do is I'll pop over to my view, and inside my view, I'm going to start making, some variables. I'm going to take in a few things. I'm going to take in a parent. I'm going to have a camera position. And I'm also going to have two more variables, which will be useful. And they're basically tracking the cursor position. Okay, that's a good amount of setup for now. Pretty bland at the moment. When this main canvas basically gets clicked on, we fetch the position, and then we send a message back to the parent and say, hey, you should handle this click event. It happened here. Before I go back and handle that click event, I'm going to add some conversion functions, just because I think they may be useful. So we've got screen coordinates, and screen coordinates are pixels, but we want to work out like where in the world that actually corresponds to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the x coordinate displacement from the, no, I'm going to bias it actually by subtracting half of the screen's width, and this sets it up so that now the center of the screen x coordinate corresponds to 0, and left is negative, right is positive, and so on. And then I'm going to shrink that a little bit. What I want to do is divide it by width, and this will get it between +1 and -1. But I also need to take into account the zoom factor. And then finally, this is a bit of trickery, I'm going to subtract the camera's position, and just with the sign convention, it turns out that that's achieved by adding. So this is how we get our x coordinate. The way we get our y coordinate is very, might help to convert that to a float. We'll see. The way we get the y coordinate is very similar. Just flip things around and rename everything appropriately. Cool, okay. And now I have the inverse operation, which basically takes that position somewhere in world space and indicates like where in pixel space, where on the screen would this thing appear. Cool, and I just noticed there's something that I missed, and that is up above. I should be dividing everywhere by width. The reason I'm dividing by width is that width is the larger of the two dimensions, and it maintains the aspect ratio. But I understand I did not really give much explanation what was going on here, but hopefully you can see that these transformations are sort of related to each other. They are actually inverse transformations. It's enough to understand that we're sort of scaling things appropriately, subtracting things. To be honest, a lot of this was just complete experimentation, and it turns out to work. So that's probably enough for now on the view. I just wanted to get those conversion functions. So I will sort of collapse that for now, and then I'll go over to the controller and define that click function. Okay, that's a fair amount of work. What this is doing is I'm basically saying, okay, let's say that I've let me also go ahead and redraw the view. Okay, cool. So let's say I've clicked on the canvas somewhere. What I want to do is work out where that occurred, and then if I'm in new object mode, then I'll create an object at that position. Now what I'll do is I'll just go back to the view and I'll set it up so that I can actually draw those objects. And in order to do that, I'm going to need to import the model. As you can see here, we're sort of filling the rectangle first, then drawing the outline around the outside. I'm not sure why this took me so long to type, but there we have it. And fingers crossed, let's see what happens. And this could fail. It does fail. Okay. Oh yeah, in the creation. Okay. Okay, let's see. So if I click, yep, we make a player. I can also make a, but we don't seem to be saving it. Okay, we can drop a player, can drop a monster, a block, and a coin. Okay, very cool. So those are the basics. Now what I want to do is I want to incorporate some snapping. So I'll go back here and I'm also going to take that world position and start snapping it a little bit. So sort of rounding it. Again, this is just one of those situations where I experimented until things looked right. Okay, so now this has the effect that if I run it, I can sort of go make a player, make another player. Oh, it doesn't matter. Oh no, there definitely is some. It's just a very fine snapping. Okay, there's something happening there. Alrighty, so I just realized that everything was getting a little too spaced out and diffuse, so probably meant it was time for me to take the task and break it down into some more sub-steps. So to start with, here's a refresher of where we're at. We can make an object, and by the way, we can also zoom in and zoom out, and that's all working. Okay, so I've made some items here. One is it'll be really great if we can draw grid lines. Turns out it's not too hard to do. So let's go over to our main view. A lot of this is going to be in the main view, by the way. And we just go down to the paint event and okay, so that's the object stuff. And then before I draw the objects, I'm going to draw my grid lines. Okay, cool. So what I'm doing at the moment, this is a little bit hacky, I'll admit, but we basically take the camera position, we go 1 to the left, which if the camera is always positioned at the center of the screen, moving 1 to the left will simply get us to the leftmost side of the screen. I go ahead and snap that with this rounding operation, and then I find the pixel coordinate for that. Because we could always start from a pixel coordinate of x equals 0 right on the left, on the hard left of the screen, but I want the grid to exist in world space. So if I move around and fractions of that grid are off the visible region, I want to maintain that. Anyway, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to keep going in a while loop on the x, and I'm just going to keep drawing. So we'll have the top point, which will be at our x coordinate, but then at y 0, and then similarly we'll have the bottom point, which will be at our x coordinate and y right at the bottom basically, and then we'll go ahead and draw that line. Then what I'll do is I'll increment x by a grid space, and then I'll use that to find the not screen x, world x. I'll increment my world space by a little bit, and then I'll use that to find the new x coordinate. Let's see how that goes. Give it a shot. Okay, excellent. I see I've got my things. I can drop something down, and we see that it snaps properly no matter where I drop it. Okay, so we can zoom in, and everything's maintained. We can zoom out. That's looking good. Now note that if we get out, this starts to get really, really bad. So something we can also do is conditionally do this. Only draw the grid if we're at a certain zoom level. And while I'm at it, I'll go ahead and do the same thing, just drawing the horizontal grid lines. Cool. Okay, let's see what that looks like. The old classic. Okay, so what's happening is just the convention with reversing the y. It was meant to be... There we go. Let's try that. Okay, cool. So we've got the grid, and we can see that everything's snapping. We can zoom in, that looks good. We can zoom out, and fingers crossed when we get to a certain level, the grid disappears. Reduces visual clutter. So we can zoom out, we can move around, see the basic shape of our map, then zoom in and apply details. Okay, pretty happy with that. Okay, so next item on the list, camera movement. To help with this, I've included some images. So open up the graphics folder. These sorts of ones. So we have down, left, play, we're not going to need that, right. You see what we got. Up. Cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of put these icons in, and I'm going to draw them in just over here, and I'm going to have some sort of detection to basically test if I've pressed any of those buttons. So let's get into that. I'll need to go to my main view because the main view is going to be managing it, and I'll just get this out of the way for now. Okay, so in my initializer, I'm going to set up a dictionary where the keys of the dictionary are the camera movement action, and the values of the dictionary are just a bunch of information which will be used to draw each of the images. Okay, cool. So what I've got is I've got a bundle of info associated with every image. First up, we have the destination rectangle, which is where on the widget this thing's going to be drawn. It's X, Y, width and height. Then we have the raw pixels, which we load in. And then finally we have the region within the raw pixels, which is going to be drawn into there. So I'll just duplicate this and I'll adjust it for each of the individual icons. Okay, cool. I think that's fine. So then the next step is to draw these icons. So I can close this down and go to the paint event, and this will happen after everything else. So right after the objects. If I go through these will be, by default for a dictionary, it'd be the key values, which are integers. So I want the actual corresponding objects, which would be the values. Okay, there we have it. Okay, so we've got these icons. They don't really do anything, but that's totally fine. I'll just get out of that. Now let's connect them up. So in our view, we've already got a mouse press event. Now you see just a second ago, I clicked where that icon was and it dropped an object. I only want to do one of those things. I only want to move the camera when I click on a button. I don't want to drop an object. And so I'll intercept this, and before I send that click message, I'll handle the logic myself. Okay, so you see, along the way, I've defined this new method, which I haven't filled in yet, but I'll go ahead and fill it in now. Okay, there we have it. So pretty much we just detect which movement code was put in. We set our displacements as appropriate and then apply them to the camera. The purpose of this zoom factor is to correct for zooming in and out, specifically zooming out. If we zoom out, it's probably because we want to navigate across the map quite quickly, and so I'm trying to keep the movement independent of the zoom level. The movement's done completely in screen space. So let's give it a go. So if I move, it's a little hard to see. It's a little easier if I drop something down. So here I can see that, yep, I'm moving. That's pretty cool. I can zoom out, and that movement is still pretty reasonable. I can zoom in to get more fine-tuned movement. Okay, pretty cool. This is just the gift that keeps on giving, isn't it? When I originally did this, I thought maybe I'll do it as a series. No, I'll do it as a video. Okay, so new mode. Really what I want to do, I'm trying to systematize this, is I want to handle all the different mouse options in each of the modes. So you can sort of see that I'm doing some left clicking in new mode already, but I'm going to go in there and just add some caveats to that. Add some little edge cases. So here I've got my click function. And there's an edge case to this, which is I can left click to add objects. But what happens if I click to add an object, but there's already an object under my mouse? I don't want to be adding double objects, stacks of objects that I can't see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a function which takes in the position, and it tells me which object, if any, is currently sitting in that position. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to check each of my objects. We look through each of our objects. If one of our objects basically has that point, it gets returned, and that's it. So I'll minimize that, and then I'll use that up above. Also, while I'm at it, I'll do this. I'll say I want to test if I've got a left click or a right click. Okay, so here I'm testing to see if I can drop something. I want to also check if I've got nothing currently under the mouse. So let me just test this again. I can create an object like that, but now I can't put objects on top of each other, which makes it more stable. Okay, I'm happy with that. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to handle right click. Drop an object down, drop another object down, and if we right click and we right click on an object, that object gets deleted. Finally, mouse movement. So what I would like is I would like to move the mouse around on the canvas and see a preview of where the object will land. This is really useful because it's hard to predict how the mouse snapping is going to work. So here I've got a mouse press event. I'm going to add a mouse move event. There we go. So I'm basically applying the same rules that I was applying before when creating objects. So this is using the same coordinate calculations that we'll be using when we drop objects in our world, just to give a preview. In addition, every time a mouse movement event is triggered, I also want to force a repaint event to be triggered. So I can do that by simply calling the repaint function. That'll do it. And also, by default, this mouse movement is only going to happen when the widget is focused, but I can force it to happen regardless just by saying set mouse tracking. So we're almost done. Now this mouse cursor world pos is keeping track of where the object would land if we were to click, and we're forcing to repaint. What I'm going to do is I'm going to minimize all of this. I'm going to go to that repaint event and put in the logic to draw that ghosted object where the mouse would be. Okay, so I'm not going to be doing previews in every single mode, but we're definitely going to do it in new mode. So I'll have Cool. So I should probably step through. I've just been typing, not talking. Okay, so the basic idea is that if we've got a mouse sort of moving within the screen and we are in new object mode, then we fetch the snapped coordinates of the mouse. This is based, the object we're going to draw is based on what the editor is about to drop, what our brush is. So we fetch those attributes. We use this to construct in screen space a rectangle where the representing the object. Then we fetch the color, apply a transparency of 50%, and then draw that whole thing. So let's go ahead, give that a go. Cool. And now it's a lot easier to guess where this object is going to end up. We can zoom out. That's pretty cool. We can move around. It all seems to work pretty well. There's one more thing, and that is sort of, this is the player, because it says player. But wouldn't it be better if we could also see that info reflected here? And it's actually easy enough. What I'm going to do is draw text in those rectangles just while I'm at it. So I'll go to the regular object rendering, and then this will be just after I fill the rectangle, but before I draw the border. And I also only want to draw at certain zoom levels, so I'll take that into account. So I draw the object, and I can really zoom in and see, yep, that's a player. Text is a little small, but I mean, we can change that. But also as we zoom out to a certain amount, it sort of vanishes after a certain amount. Alrighty, so edit mode, left click. When I left click in edit mode, I want whatever first up, I want a currently selected object. And if I've got a currently selected object, I want to move it. So actually I just thought about this. Select mode probably makes more sense. Let's do select mode and then we'll worry about edit mode. So the left click stuff, as always, will be in the click function. So I'll go over there. It's actually pretty fast, right? Just select the object really quickly. Now, right click is going to be the same. So when we right click, no matter which mode we're in, whatever's under our mouse is going to get destroyed. So I can actually go over and remove that from all these cases because we've handled it already. Okay, so I think we've done left click. That's okay. Now I just want to handle mouse movement. So when I'm in edit mode and I move my mouse over an object, I want that object to become highlighted to show that, yep, this is the thing that you're about to select. So right here where I go to draw the objects, I'm also going to get the selected object. And then right here where I select the color, I'm going to do a few extra checks. So I'm going to have a conditional code which I call hover, which is basically, are we about to select this thing and we're hovering over it? Got an object out there. I can then go into select mode, and when I come over it, that object is highlighted. Now, what I would like as well is when I select it, I'd like to indicate that that is the object which is currently selected. And that's actually not too bad to build in. I can just go to this view right down here. I've got test, we go hover. So I'll go either we're hovering or object is the selected object. So now we can give this a shot. Can make a whole bunch of these things, and you can see that when we drop it down, it is the currently selected object. That's pretty cool. So now we can go, we can select any of these things. When we click them, they become the selected object. And yeah, it's pretty cool. Left click on edit mode. So obviously I only want to actually move things when I'm in edit mode and also I've got something which is selected. But in that case, no problem. I'll just basically reconstruct the rectangle and that'll move it. So I drop an object, it's currently selected. I go to edit mode. Just too many brackets. Let's drop an object. I was a little too keen there for a second. Click here and it moves. It's very cool. So we can drop a whole bunch of objects. And I can say, alrighty, I want to select this one here. I want to move it here. Look, it's not a perfect tool. It could be made a little better, but the fact is, for indie development, this is sort of the bare minimum. This is Turing complete. This sort of gets us to the point where we can start making stuff and not drinking coffee and editing text files till 4 a.m. We've all been there. Right, so we've got left click, that works. Now I just want to do mouse movement. So let's get onto that. Oh, for the type of object. Yeah, so if we're in new mode, then it's based on the brush. But if we're in edit mode, then it would be based on the selected object. Down the player, then I drop down, maybe not a coin, maybe a monster or something. It really doesn't matter. Then I go into edit mode, and this is saying, hey, you can move a monster any of these places. Then I select the player, and I go to edit mode, and hopefully you can see that it's not, yeah, right, so even though my brush is monster, because I'm in edit mode, it's taking the player's color, and it's setting everything up properly. We can click off, and there we have it. So again, pretty happy with that. This is the core functionality of the editor done. Congratulations. How long did that take? A while. So we can close that down. And we've sort of got 3 functions to go, and I am going to blast through them. We're going to write the save game, the load game function, then we're going to create the menu, and that's going to tie everything all together. Just go to our controller. First thing I'm going to need is I'm going to need to query the system and say, all right, you want to save, which file do you want to save as? We can do this with a Q file dialog. So what I want to get is I want to get the file name, and this is returned by a Q file dialog, and we have a bunch of pre-made options. I'll go, what is it? It's not loading it for some reason, but anyway, it's not ask, I'm thinking of TK enter, get save file name, and then we need to pass in the parent, which I'll just put self. Now it's possible that we can go get save file name and the user could cancel. In the case that we cancel, we'll get an empty string as the file name will be element 0. There's a whole bunch of things on this list that it returns. As you can see, it returns 2 strings actually. But anyway, the first one's a file name. And I'm rambling. So the test is whether the length of is invalid, so less than or equal to 0. If that's the case, then we are done. Otherwise, we can unpack and we'll say file name is thing 0 of that tuple. Okay, no problem. And then I want to start doing my file IO. So I'll open the file in write mode. Then I'll look through all of my objects and I will basically serialize my objects. The objects are very simple. It really comes down to simply dumping them out as readable text. Okay, so I'm going to write onto that file, and here's the convention that I made up. You can do whatever you want, but I'm going to have the, I'll put a bracket immediately. Change my mind. So first I'll put the object name and then open bracket, and then I will, what am I thinking? Change my mind again. But anyway, going to separate everything by spaces. So the first thing will be the object name, then we'll have the coordinates, and that's all we need. Very, very simple. And yeah, we don't need anything else, I think. So let's give this a go. Go ahead and I'll do what I had before. All right. Actually, I'll test that later. We will test that later because we need to make a menu in order to do that. Okay, so we have saving. Now I'm going to load a function. I'll load a map. And I'll do this with get open file name. Same logic as before. I'll go ahead, I'll open this in read mode, and then I'll loop through. Ooh, where did that come from? I'll loop through one line at a time. I'll just do some formatting, getting rid of leading and trailing spaces if there are any. Remember that here I wrote the name with object names. Well, here I'm going to read this back and I'm going to fetch the corresponding code based on the object name. So the object name should be thing0 within the arguments. Okay, then I need the x, y, the width and the height. So what I'll do to get the x is I'll convert this to a float. Just like that. And then for the width and height, I'll fetch that from the database. Then I can go ahead and append this to my list of objects. That should be fine. And then maybe one more consideration is when I load a game, that's a pretty fair indication that I'm getting rid of the game, the map that I've currently got if I have one. So just to be sure, I'll go, yeah, basically wipe out my objects, make them all empty. Okay, so that's loading, saving, that's done. I'm just going to put, I should probably do this as well. Maybe instead of doing this, I should just go, and then just after loading, I should probably redraw everything. And that's pretty much what I'll do for a new game as well. So what have we got? New, load, save. What else do we need? That's our menu. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll make a new function, which will basically build our menu. Building the basic things first, and then I'll add the functionality later. And I'll also sort of create that. So in the initializer, go through all this stuff, create the menu, and that should be fine. Yeah, so I can sort of see this up the top. I can go new, load, save. They don't do anything. Cool. Okay, so now I'll just connect those signals to actions. Okay, so a moment of truth. Let's see which errors we get. Okay, so I'll create a bunch of objects, one of each type. We'll have a monster, a block, and a coin, just like that. Then I'll go and I'll save that, and I will call it test. That's fine. Seems like it worked. I'll go ahead and close it. In the files, I've now got test, and it's just saved my objects in a really handy, simple format. So I can close that. Now give this another go and say, alrighty, let's load text. And it's got all my objects as before. And let me just go, all right, new, so that's all gone. Just make a bunch of things. This is my really unimaginative level. And then I'll just go, hey, load. Cool. Awesome. Okay, very cool. So I know that it was a long journey, but we got there in the end. By the end of this video, you should have a basically functional and pretty useful editor that you can jump in and extend. I know that some things are sort of just thrown in there, like the screen coordinate conversions and things. A little confusing at times, I get it, but hopefully you've got enough to really hit the ground and start working. Anyway, all the best, hope you had fun, and I will see you again soon. Bye.